I want to go right now to Fox News national security strategist and former deputy assistant to President Trump, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. And Dr. Gorka, before we go down the path of how bad this is, and we will go down that path because to me this is outrageous, the idea that potentially one administration could have somebody in on a campaign informing that administration's FBI of the inner workings of the campaign. Let me just qualify this, however, by saying if indeed there was reason to believe the Russians were trying to infiltrate the Trump campaign, and by the way, they may have been doing the same thing with the Hillary campaign. So if indeed you believed this, then to cut the FBI, dare I say, with you, a little bit of slack, then it might make sense to have an intelligence asset somewhere there, provided, again, let me just qualify this because my concern is that it was politically motivated and not motivated for actual security reasons. But if indeed there was a security concern, then you might have an asset. Heck, you might have it in both campaigns, especially given all the Clinton Foundation work and how much money it was receiving from all kinds of governments all over the world. Your thoughts?
Russian meddling in other people's democratic elections is not new, Trish. Right. Anybody who says it's new has no sense of history and has been asleep since 1917. But this is something else. This is something qualitatively different. If the accusations turn out to be true about this asset, this mole, or what now seems to be the case, multiple FBI assets, this will be the first time ever in American history that one administration put covert assets for political purposes into the other party's campaign to undermine and to potentially frame the candidate of that party.
Yeah, Dr. Gorka, you're assuming it's for political purposes, and I guess the question
what is the
we don't know
crime?
as it necessarily is. Well, I mean, if they legitimately had their concerns, I'm just creating a they might legitimately say, hey, we need to gather some intelligence. And by the way, I would have encouraged them to do the same on the other side, again, knowing that the Russians were trying to infiltrate us.
Let me give you an example. Would you think it would be okay if somebody said, hey, Russians often undermine journalists or exploit journalists. Let's target Trish Regan's family and let's find somebody who can get a job inside her family or get close to her family, because who knows, there are bad guys out there.
Okay, that analogy
you can't do that in America.
To me. Forgive me, but it just doesn't make but
right.
the analogy.
That's the point.
It's different. You know, you're talking about someone's personal life versus a campaign, Dr. Gorka.
Trish, it's the same thing. You cannot put assets covertly unless you have suspicion of a crime being committed. Let's see it.
They had that suspicion. They had the FISA warrant, blah, blah, blah. Again, I don't agree. I will qualify all this by saying, look, I hear you. My concern is you got, indeed, some kind of deep state on your hands. However, if it were done in the right way, I'm just trying to understand why they might have done it, then, Dr. Gorka, they may have been trying to gather intelligence in order to figure out what the heck the Russians were doing.
If that were true, Trish, you wouldn't have John Brennan threatening the House Speaker today. You wouldn't have him threatening Mitch McConnell. You wouldn't have the former CIA director threatening a sitting president. If this is all above board, if they had concrete evidence that there were Russian agents inside the Trump campaign undermining our democracy, then John Brennan wouldn't be howling at the moon the way he is now. To quote the Bard, the lady doth protest too much. John Brennan is clearly guilty of doing things that are unconstitutional, as is Clapper, as is Comey. Otherwise, they'd say, hey, guys, sorry.
This was entirely political,
totally.
i.e. Watergate times 10 or 1,000?
Absolutely. If this was all above board, then John Brennan wouldn't be screeching on Twitter, he'd be going to the president saying, Mr. President, we had XYZ Russian assets that were identified in your campaign, and that's why we did what we did. He would have nothing to hide. He would have a predicated crime.
That's a valid point. I mean, I guess I'm making the point that if we are to assume that the Russians are out there meddling, and by the way, Dr. Gorka, we know that they did, and we know that they do. And by the way, I would think we do a little of the same ourselves, right? I mean, that's just the way the world works. So if they were trying to... Go ahead.
There's a big difference. We have Fourth Amendment rights in this country.
Right.
Just because there are bad guys out there doesn't mean you can trammel across everybody's constitutional rights and say, well, you know, there might be a threat, therefore, let's just penetrate intelligence assets into the other campaign's headquarters or Hillary's. It doesn't matter. You're not allowed to do that in America. You can't say, well, it's possibly a threat, therefore we're just going to blanket penetrate your private organization. That's illegal.
So how do you protect the country? What does the president need to do? Because I think he needs to be way out in front of this for 18 and 2020. What do you do to protect and to make sure that this does not happen again? How do you make sure that the Russians stay on the sidelines along with anybody else that may be looking at us?
Three things. Number one, all of the individuals that are trying to cover up corruption right now need to be stripped of their security clearances. The idea that Clapper can be working for CNN or MSNBC or anybody else with his clearances, Brennan, Hillary, these individuals still have their clearances. Why? Strip them right now, Mr. Trump. You have the authority to do it. Secondly, we have to have a new, I don't like special counsels. They are an unguided missile. I would like to have a team created of individuals from the FBI and the DOJ who have nothing to do with the swamp. Get away from the infected barrel, go to a clean barrel, go out to the Midwest, go out and find agents from the Bureau who have no connections with the swamp, bring them here and create a team to investigate all the potential abuse of power and political targeting of Donald Trump's campaign right now. And all of the documents pertaining to Operation Crossfire Hurricane must be declassified by the president. He can do that at the stroke of a pen, remove anything that refers to assets and agents, but declassify them now so that we can disinfect the rot.
And I'm getting a wrap from the control room, but very quickly, as he sits down and he meets with Rosenstein and he meets with Wray, would you say those three things and anything else, Dr. Gorka?
I talked to Ray, basically, according to my contacts, has been hiding out in his office since he was appointed. The president has to say, do your job or choose the route of resignation. And similarly with Rod Rosenstein, he has to remove himself from the whole process because he was bosom buddies with Robert Mueller and escorted Robert Mueller to the White House to interview for the job of the FBI director. These people need to do the honorable thing and either step up to the plate or resign.